All right, we're live in person. We're live on the interwebs, on social medias. All right, let's get started. Hello, Smart Money Tree podcast listeners. Welcome to this week's show. My name is Kirk Chisholm, and I will be your host. So today, I'm joined with my good friend Doug Hagren. Hey, Doug.
Hey, Kirk. Happy Friday.
Doug was
Again.
waving as if the listeners could hear that. It's a very loud wave.
I did answer. Afterwards.
Doug was on vacation for a few weeks, so he doesn't remember quite how the podcast go. This is an audio show.
Well, here's the thing, Kirk. I'm just assuming that more and more people are going to start to take advantage of the wonderful video medium that you put out there and watch.
That's
Yeah.
true. It
I
is
mean,
quite
you show
beautiful.
charts every week. That's not helping all those people listening.
That's true. That's true, Doug. That is a
So
good
those of you
point.
listening, it's time to log on and watch the video because it's definitely going to add a lot of context.
I was hoping you wouldn't call me out on that, but thank you.
Well, if you're hey, listen, what goes around comes around. Anyway.
I know. A lot's going around here. Cool. So so we won't talk about the disastrous political debate because we talked about that yesterday or last show. But I did want to get into certain areas, and so what I think is interesting, just from a big picture perspective, before we get into a lot of the mental models and some of the charts, is we talk a lot about in the show on data and how data should be interpreted. And if you're a statistician, then you're probably good with all this stuff. You understand probabilities. You understand there's nothing really definitive. There's only really probabilities. So as you're looking at data, you can't deduce that if this happens, then this happens. Yet our primitive monkey minds think that way, right? We see something, we say, oh, that's why this is this, right? It's like, oh, here's a perfect example, the inverted yield curve. Well, every single time the inverted yield curve has happened has led to recession. That is correct. All 10 times that has happened. But we've been in an inverted yield curve for the last 2.5 years, and it still hasn't led to recession, even though that technically is the marker. I think it's 2 years or 2.5 years. It hasn't happened. Now, my supposition is that it only happens after it reverts from an inverted yield curve back to a normal yield curve. So that's always been my thing, is it's still inverted. And because it's still inverted, we're not seeing one. I don't know if that's the reason, but that's my thesis. I'm sticking to it. Anyway, my point is that just because 10 out of 10 happens doesn't mean it's going to happen on the 11th try, right? It's all about probabilities. And so when you're looking at data, you're looking at a data point, and that doesn't necessarily lead to truth. I mean, scientists know this factually. Just because you got data doesn't mean it's true. It means it might be probabilistically or directionally accurate, right? If you do a test like a phase 1 or phase 2 trial and it comes back with awesome data, like 80% of the people saw success. Yeah, but 20% didn't. So directionally, that's probably the way you want to go, right? Directionally, probabilistically, they're looking at it and saying, well, we can help 80% of the people, so let's go public and sell this thing, right? It doesn't mean it's true. It just means that 80% of the people, it works for 80% of the people, 20% it doesn't. Well, maybe that 20%, there's another problem that's undiagnosed, right? You don't know, right? So getting 100% is a rarity, but our monkey brains want to see a data point and say this is factually accurate. And the problem is that's not how the world works. So you have to retrain your monkey mind to look past that and look through the data and say, okay, directionally, I like where this is going. Can I find any other confirming evidence? No, sometimes you can't, right? And in the markets, frequently you can't. Actually, in the markets, you can almost never definitively prove almost anything because it's too complex. There's too many players. Unless somebody comes out and says, sorry, I did that. They talk about the fat finger trade a few years ago. Oh, it was a fat finger trade. Who was it? Well, we don't know. So how do you know it was a fat finger trade? You don't know. And there's no way you could know unless somebody came out and said, sorry, I dumped 100 billion shares of Apple yesterday. That's why the stock tanked. I put that on the market and it just went in. Okay, I'll believe that. I mean, I don't know how many shares there are of Apple. That's probably more than there are. But point being is, okay, if you're saying that this event happened, I would still say it's probably 99% chance that was the case. Because the market is complex. So I always go back to the 2011 gold crash, where on April 15th, the price of gold crashed below the support level. And everyone's like, oh, it's because of tax day. People were cashing out to pay for taxes. First of all, that doesn't even make sense. Because if that was the case, first of all, most people don't have gold. The ones that do have gold are not selling it for anything, right? So that logic makes no sense. Second of all, even if that was the case, if you were to sell your gold ETF, it's going to take 3 days to settle. It's going to take probably another day or two for you to get the money. That doesn't make sense. And if you were selling physical gold, you're going to walk down, you're going to get the cash, you go back to the bank, send your check. Are you really doing it on April 15th? Probably not, right? So all of that logic doesn't make sense. So you can deconstruct a lot of these theories just on the surface. Now, most people don't because it sounds directionally accurate. And that's what we call a half-truth. Half-truths are what poisons the well of our political economy, right? If you look at socially, politically, people all talk about half-truths. What they don't talk about is the fact where it isn't true. Half-truths, I think Benjamin Franklin said that half-truths are more dangerous than a lie because half-truths sound true. A lie doesn't sound true. Oh, that's a lie. I know this person didn't do this. But a half-truth sounds true enough where you're like, okay, it tricks your mind to thinking, okay, that's true. So what ends up happening is you just take it as true. And in essence, it's not really true. It's sort of true. But that's what gets you into trouble. So you have to really train your monkey mind to stop focusing on true versus false and start focusing on probabilities, direction. Is it directionally accurate? And we're going to show some stuff here that, we talk about a lot in the show. Chart crimes. Like chart crimes are basically someone's story that they're trying to convince you. It's directionally accurate. It's not 100% true because they're missing data points, but for the story they're telling, it fits. So, part of the reason we do this show is to train everyone to help you understand investing better so you can think about it, because the biggest challenge in investing is your own mind. The math is easy. Anyone can do the math, right? I can do the math really quickly in my head. The math is easy. It's training your monkey mind to not make bad decisions. That's the hard thing. What are your thoughts on this, Doug? I know we've talked a lot about this before we get into the charts, but what's going to be in your experience?
Yeah, in my experience, I think what you're describing is vacuum chambers, and people live in them. And the world of social media has absolutely expedited the impact of that because the algorithms are designed in order to create profit for these social media companies based on the ability to keep you engaged, which then again creates an attraction to advertisers. Those of you listening today, how did you find this podcast? It was probably, if you didn't already have a connection or refer to it, it may have been something that's popped up in your feed because of things that you were following or listening to that made all of a sudden a trigger that caused this to be put in front of you. Okay. And, if you are left leaning and you have certain political beliefs, and you're going to search for that, or you're going to click on things that attract you, you're going to find automatically that there's going to be more of those things in your feed. And if you pose a question about something, you're going to find all of a sudden that you're going to find things in those feed that are going to be very heavily slanted to however it picked up that you were intrigued by the answers you found in those questions. And we've all experienced this. How many times I have a gentleman that I know that is an attorney in intellectual property that one of his clients is, he basically fights against big tech. That's what he does because they're always stealing patents and copyrights. And he was telling me, he's like, look, Facebook has applied for a significant number of patents that basically, allow them to listen to or, track what's happening based on other apps that you're on. Now, a lot of those have been denied, and I'm not sitting there making accusations, but we all know this. You're having a conversation with your wife about something. Next thing you know, can look at their phone, and what's the next thing that's up? It's an ad, something to deal with your conversation, right? And they're designed to keep you engaged. And so what it does is it creates in these vacuum chambers, or what is also known as confirmation bias. Because actually, pardon me, I'm getting over being sick. Let's rewrite. I mean, it was a Freudian slip there. I meant to say confirmation bias, and it's coming out as confirmation virus, which is probably very, very correct in itself, right? Um, but ultimately speaking, if you believe in something, whether that is you believe in a greed based situation, you believe Bitcoin is going to be the great cure of the future, right? Or you believe that the Republicans are the, have the perfect plan, or you believe that all liberals are, using the word libtard, right? That you might believe that. Or on the other hand, you left lean and you believe that everybody, that's on the right ring circle is bigoted and, closed minded and, this and that. Okay. You're going to be inundated and find plenty of data that shows you Bitcoin is the greatest thing ever. Republicans or the Democrats or the conservatives, MAGA or left, are exactly everything you believe, and it is going to confirm it. If you believe or don't believe in global warming, you're going to get inundated with information to confirm your bias that is going to make you have an additional amount of conviction in what you already believe. It's designed that. It's always been this way. We've always been influenced by the world around us and the information that we want to see, okay, just to validate our feelings. But now more than ever with technology, it is easier than ever to find it. It's also being established in a way to force it in your face, okay? And so when we talk about financial, again, if we believe the world is coming to an end, and that financially it's a disaster, and if we believe that, yes, the government printing more money leads to inflation, right? Kirk, we've talked about this plenty of times. Does government printing more money lead to inflation? It is a variable, but it is absolutely mathematically not a direct correlation, because if that money gets absorbed, there's no inflation. But if that money doesn't get absorbed, then it's going to create a greater demand against supply, and that's what leads to inflation. That's one of the factors. But if you believe that printing money leads to inflation, you're going to have an endless number of information that's going to confirm your bias that just having more money and printing money leads to inflation. Matter of fact, I've got a chart, so probably a chart crime that's, if we want to look at it, that I put out there that basically shows all of the money. There's people out there, it's like, look at Biden and all the money that's been printed by him. Well, guess what? A lot of that money got printed when Trump was still president. Was it because of Trump? Was it because of Biden? Let's face it. It was because of COVID, right? Regardless of whether or not it was a political stance or why, we don't care. Now, all we know is in our position that money went up during this president, or money went up during this president. And we're going to use that as a reason to justify how we believe politically, when they may have, when the reality is there's so many more factors involved in what occurred. And that's when we start to ignore the details of history that may be counter to what we believe, so that we can be able to have a more solid argument in our own conviction. So yeah, it's only getting harder, Kirk. I mean, in absolutely 100% of the time, even in the things that I do. So that when I'm researching for our conversations, I am looking for information that creates a dialogue that we can have in a as much unbiased position as possible for us. But yet, when I start to click on those things that tell me the world is coming to an end financially, I all of a sudden will find that in my feed, everything I'm seeing is negative.
Yeah.
And that can lead to a conversation, say, look, the world is going, we've got all these signs, the imminent recession. I have to force myself to then click on the opposite. I'm not saying always do that, to get information back on my feed that shows me charts and information that creates counter to that argument. Otherwise, everything on my feed goes one direction or the other.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point here. Is with confirmation bias, historically people seek out the stuff that confirms their thinking, because we as human beings, we want to be proven right? We want to know that we're smart, we're important, we're right. It's just an innate human thing. So we've always sought out things that confirm what we're thinking, like most people do. And as Doug said, social media has amplified that because not only are you seeking it out, but on top of that, all they show you is reconfirming information. So you might, so a normal person might look at that and say, all right, I'm going to seek out, I really believe in, I'm a liberal and I believe in the democratic ideals. So I'm going to go watch CNN or MSNBC or the New York Times. Are going to seek out that information and think, no, this isn't biased. Really, it's just reconfirming your own opinions because you think, well, no, this is they're correct, they're smart, and all they really are thinking is well, it's just reconfirming what I'm already thinking, right? I'm not characterizing whether it's right or wrong. I'm just saying that's how we normally think, right? And we have our preferred news sources. So when Fox came out, people on the left started freaking out, like, oh my God, they're wrong, they're doing this, and it's like, well, no, they were just smart enough to realize that not everybody believed in the liberal ideals, that there were conservatives who believed something different, and they were appealing to that audience. So what happened is split it down the middle. The people on the right are watching Fox, people on the left are watching MSNBC and CNN and these other news stations, and they're just basically caught in their own little streams. And so what happens? You go to social, so that's normal, right? Like that's been going on for a long time, and we all kind of know about it. But that's the normal way things work. With social media will see that you're more right leaning and say, all right, we're going to show you more right leaning stuff. So here's what happens. If you're watching like corporate news and you're seeing a certain line of thinking, you can say, okay, this is what the news is telling me. But you might see something else. The problem with social media is you don't see anything else because all you see is the reconfirming stuff that are hitting your, it's like a dopamine hit in your head, like, oh, more. The whole world thinks this. Because that's how your brain works, is you're seeing all the data and there's a preponderance of evidence that all these people are saying this, so it must be true. All that's happening is they're not showing the other side. So it might be evenly split down the middle, but you're convinced that, oh my God, these people are stupid. There's only a handful of them. No, there's a whole world of people that think differently. The problem is you're not seeing that because social media cuts that off. And that's the danger of social media, amongst other things. And there's actually a good call it documentary. I don't like documentaries, but there was a good quote unquote documentary about social media on Netflix a while ago. But I do want to share, I want to get off that because it's an important topic. So I wanted to reiterate it, but I did want to get into
okay, Kirk. I just want to say it's called The Social Dilemma on Netflix.
Yes. Thank you, Doug. Social Dilemma. It was great. I mean, I only needed to watch it for like 20 minutes and got the point, but it was pretty good. And it did talk about how even some of the CEOs of some of these tech companies won't let their kids use social media because it's so dangerous and addictive. So if that doesn't tell you how bad it is, you've been warned. Okay, so we're going to start with a chart crime. And I'm going to share this. Thanks, Doug. This is a chart crime. And in somewhat, it's a chart crime is somewhat supposed to be funny. But if you look at this chart, it's like, hey, if you $100 a month, every month into Bitcoin, gold, and savings, oh, they all be pretty similar. Yeah, but if you look at the x-axis, you see that they're all the same date. So it's it's a chart crime. It's kind of humorous because in order for them to actually line it up even this close would be close to impossible, right? You just the reality of trying to do this would just be, I don't know what the dates are because they're all the same date, 2014, 2014, 2014. Oh, sorry, it's an animated GIF. Anyway, I wanted to use this as a chart crime because sometimes if you don't understand how the chart is set up, then you're not going to understand what you're looking at, and you'll get a false sense. So I do want to share one thing. So we're going to talk about crypto here. So there was a chart Doug shared about the German government selling Bitcoin. Huge amount of Bitcoin being sold. We don't know why. Frankly, I don't know if, or frankly, why the German government owns Bitcoin. That's another thing I want to know. Why do they own it to begin with? I'm not familiar unless they were thinking of creating their own currency based on it and they decide not to. I have no idea. But anyway, interesting data point. It's not conclusive. It's just a data point. I'm going to come back to this. And then here's a Bitcoin. Actually, this is Bitcoin versus Tether. anyway, we see a lot of these. This is basically assuming that the Bitcoin's going to crash because, hey, look at this. Technicals say this is going to crash. If you understand technicals, you know this doesn't mean anything. This means what could happen if it breaks through this support area. That is valid from a technical standpoint, right? But you don't just assume, oh, it shows this, it's going to crash. No, if it breaks through, it might crash. Might, technically speaking, but you don't always know.
If this was the Grand Teton Mountains, Kirk, this would just imply that on the other side of the mountains, you're going to go to the bottom, the depths of the Mariana Trench. So, I mean, it's like, which isn't true, right? It flattens out from there. So these things are completely manipulated to predict outcomes that may or may not exist.
Right, exactly. So here's another one, Bitcoin halvings. And this is going back, long time. Basically what it says is if once the Bitcoin halving happens, which it just did happen recently, usually I think it's within a certain period of time, I think it's 6 or 9 months, that you hit all-time highs, or maybe it's 12 months. It's not clear in the chart, but basically within a certain period of time, you will see all-time highs on the at the time, right? So it'll peak and then it'll drop. So what this is alluding to is, well, we just had a halving, which doesn't show here, oddly, which means that it should rocket ship ride up a good amount. Now, if you look at this, what you'll also notice is that the highs keep declining in percentage. Starts to basically 9,400%, then about 2,800%, then about 650%. So each time the all-time highs get lower and lower. So I don't know what that means next time. I haven't done the math, but just something to think about. A lot of people have been talking about this on the halving events with Bitcoin. Is that going to cause it to go up? I really don't know. It's basically most people are investing in Bitcoin because it's a math problem. That's a lot of the smart people will say it's just math. We have a guy, Paul Rosenberg, who we interviewed recently in the show. His interview's coming out soon. Paul's, if anyone knows Satoshi Nakamoto, it'd be Paul. Like, Paul's a really, really smart guy. He's been doing this for a long time. And he's, if I have questions, I go to Paul. Like, he's that good. Anyway, my point being is, if you're looking at this, you don't really know, but it's math, right? So if you understand math, then you could probably do pretty well with this. I don't know if Bitcoin is going to hit all-time highs in the near future, but everyone hopes so. And as we all know, hope is not a strategy.
Can I add something here again on this real quickly? I think it's a pause to remember two things. Number one, first of all, if there is a hope, and we hear, and some of you listening may have heard kind of the predictions of Bitcoin to 1 million, right?
Yep.
Or 100,000 or 1 million, whatever it is. If there is a hope that it's going to get there, it is a reminder to you about what is the purpose of this, right? Because people will tell you, it's a replacement of fiat currency. Well, if it's a replacement of fiat currency, then why does it going to 100,000 or 1 million matter? Because a currency is not intended to have appreciation like that. A currency is meant to be a means of value transfer for transactions. And so anytime you're hearing those things, it really is manipulating, or should cause a question of, is Bitcoin monetary or is it an investment? And in this case, when you talk 100 or 1 million, you're talking speculation. The second thing to remember is people talk about, it's a 69. We think it's going to go to 100. And that sounds like a lot, right? 69,000 to 100. But if you look mathematically at where Bitcoin was, let's just go away from the fiat monetary for a second. Let's just go back to the speculation side of it. Look how much Bitcoin has made compared to the S&P 500. Look how much it can make. It could go to 100. Well, here's the thing. When it was at, 5 cents? 5 cents to 69,000. I'm not even going to compound the math on that. It's an incredible, exorbitant amount of appreciation. But what happens now if Bitcoin goes from 69,000 to 100,000? Sounds like a lot, right? Sounds like a ton. But the reality is, if it's already at 69,000, 30,000 more to 100,000 is is less than a 50% increase. Okay. And let's say it does that over a 5-year period. It finally hits the 100,000. Everybody's whooping and hollering. That's only 10% a year. Now, 10% a year is nothing to be upset about, right? I mean, we could get 10% a year. I saw some the other day, Kirk said, I'm doing some financial planning. Is 10% too conservative? And I almost put my head through the computer, because anybody understands the history of the markets and the S&P 500, 10% is not what they've averaged. I'm sorry, but to be conservative would be a ridiculous statement for that. It is definitely less than 10% if you're doing conservative planning. But 10% would not be in any case a negative thing. But you have to understand percentages versus dollars. $69,000 per Bitcoin. If you held it at 5 cents to 69,000, you have made an incredible amount. But now you're hearing people say, get into it, because it could go to 100. And if it goes to 100, depending on how long it takes, that's not going to be anywhere near the appreciation it had previously. Even if it goes to 1 million, if it goes to 1 million, that would be a 1,400% return over $69,000, okay, which is incredible. And if it takes 10 or 15 or 20 years to get there, you do the average interest return of that, or the percentage return of that, it is going to be significantly less. It's already extremely expensive. So now the upside potential of it isn't anywhere near what it was. So remember, going back to confirmation bias, going back to who's behind, we talked about this, who's behind marketing this. A lot of people that are marketing Bitcoin to 100,000 or Bitcoin to 1 million, they're already holding on to it, and they want you to buy in to push it there. And you will make some return if it does that, but not compared to what they will. Understand the difference between percentages and dollars.
Yeah, no, that's a great point, Doug. And this is where it can get confusing for a lot of people, because there's a math part of this, and then there's the hope and dreams part of this. And getting in early, we found out about Bitcoin in 2017. And been using it here and again, back and forth with portfolios. And I'm not recommending Bitcoin to anybody. That's not what we do in the show. So if you want recommendations, let me know. But this is not a personal recommendation. But it has been something we've used off and on. And I think what's interesting to me is the math. Because if you look at any sort of adoption of new technology, right? You get the first movers. Then you get it's really kind of the people on the cutting edge start first, the hobbyists. Then you get people who are kind of in the space, but just learning about it. And then it gets more widely adopted, right? The people at the beginning, they were trading Bitcoins for pizza and ice cream. Like it was more of a joke, right? It was like, oh, this is kind of cool. Let's do this thing. But once it starts getting more widely adopted and used, like right now, the SEC has pretty much allowed ETFs for Bitcoin to happen. And I believe they've said that they are allowing ETFs for Ethereum to happen. They haven't come out yet. People suspect any time in the next few weeks, the first one will come live. But the point being is, like, when you're going through all this, you got to realize that there is a huge chunk of volume coming through the pipes for these assets. So financial institutions did not allow them up until recently. Now they're starting to, and people are adding them to portfolios. So what's going to be interesting to see is what actually happens. Because if you've got people saying, well, I want to put like 1% or 2% of my account into Bitcoin, let's see what happens, which is generally how these institutions are working. They're like, oh, let's try it out. And, it's an interesting idea. But how much money is going to bulldoze into these assets? I don't know. But when you do look at the fact that these assets are sitting and it's not trading, well, how useful is the asset, right? There does come a point where you're like, all right, the alpha is out of the trade, right? There will come a point where you're like, you know what, this might go to $1 million, but it's at 250,000. It might take another 10 years, 20 years to get there. Do I want to wait that long? I don't know. I'm not sure if I do. So, right, at some point, it could be like it's at 950,000 per coin and it's going to get to $1 million, or that's what the supposition is. Okay, great. So you make a 5% pop. If that's what you want with all the risk, go ahead. There's so much that is not known, but I would say that if you're looking at assets like this, just understand what you're doing and don't put all your eggs in one basket, because that's how people lose. I did want to get to this one more chart before we pivot and get into another topic, which is we've been talking a lot about this in the show, is the need for cheap clean energy? Now, our answer has always been nuclear. It's a no-brainer. The science makes sense. The math makes sense. The only thing that doesn't make sense is the green people that they're trying to prevent global warming and don't want to talk about nuclear. It's a hypocritical statement. Nuclear is far and away clearly the best source of clean, cheap energy. And if we want to grow as a society and not live in the woods, with none of the luxuries we have today, nuclear energy is the only way to get there in a scalable fashion. Now, the downside is it's probably going to take 20 years to create a reactor, which means we're not going to get there easily or quickly. That in itself is a problem because we've been so, let's just say our politicians have been as smart as you think they are in that we haven't even talked about it till now. Well, now it's too late. AI's come out. It's sucking up all of the electricity. So this chart here is a chart of data centers' use of electricity. So this is using all the different countries, and then the red line is an aggregation of all data centers. Now, this should tell you something. This line has skyrocketed from 2008 to 2024, and it just keeps going. And this is before AI really started to take hold. So if you want to understand how the world works, here's a theory I have that seems to line up but can never be proven. You want to know why they took so long to get to nuclear and all of a sudden they're doing it now? Well, I'll give you one reason. First of all, it was like a football. Like it's like trying to fix Social Security. People don't want to fix it because they'll never get reelected. That's why it won't get fixed. It'll wait till it blows up and then they'll fix it later. No one wants to take that risk as a politician. Here's another one. Nobody wants to touch nuclear because people have bad thoughts from the 70s and, Hiroshima and 3 Mile Island, all the stuff that happened. People think it's dangerous and shouldn't exist. Now, if you look at AI is basically, people have looked at the math for AI and said, all right, we need more electricity. Oh, crap. We're going to need a lot more data centers. Oh, crap. The data centers need more electricity. Holy crap. We don't have nearly enough electricity to fund all the data centers. There's going to be blackouts all over the world. So tech got together and apparently either lobbied or convinced Congress to pass this nuclear bill to allow them to reduce the regulations. Good. That's what businesses should do. Do I like the fact they didn't do it up till now? No, but I like the fact that at least it started. So I don't thank big tech for a lot, but I do thank them for this because we did need it. And a lot of cheap, clean energy will change the economy for the good. And because right now, for the next 10 to 20 years, we might be in a place where people of lower means economically are going to be in trouble because their electricity bill is going to keep going higher. I don't care if the wind farms are on or not, but when I see windmills in a high wind area are turned off because they don't want to drop the electric price, it makes you wonder who's really out to help you. Really, none of these people. They're out for themselves, and they're out to regulate prices. But once you can actually start to pump out a lot more clean, green, cheap energy, think of all the things we can do in our society by having that kind of energy. So that is a really important underpinning of our economy. And if we didn't solve it, and there is going to be a period where it's going to be really challenging, like I said, the next 10 to 20 years is going to be really tough. If we can't get through that, we're going to have a lot of volatility in the markets and prices. But once that starts to come back online, and if they can do it properly, assuming they can, because we're still talking about government, then it will change a lot of the dynamics. The question is are we going to be able to do it in time? And that question, I really don't know, because that's a long lead time. And AI, I don't know the numbers, but AI is going to exponentially increase the data usage and the electricity usage. And, you think California's having a tough time with blackouts and brownouts. We're going to see a lot more of that across the country. So anyway, I did want to share that. It is an important component that underpins a lot of this stuff. So if you want to know why our thoughts are what they are, sometimes we don't always clearly define them on the show, but when we get a chance, we try to. And this is one of the main reasons why nuclear has moved forward when it didn't before, is because, the economy actually worked in the way it should. Sometimes it works in the way it shouldn't. But anyway, Doug, what are your thoughts?
Well, I was going to, looking at what you just said, I think one other thing to factor in there, and this has been a talk for the last couple of years, is the impact of, and continuing on this conversation, Bitcoin, but crypto mining, right? So, not only do you have, so you take what, I mean, this AI, this conversation around the impact of the need of energy for AI is a relatively recent conversation because of what's really happened, especially with NVIDIA over the last 18 months. All of a sudden, AI has been there for a long time in one capacity or another. As a matter of fact, I think trying to remember who one of them, if it was Cuban or Musk or somebody, put something out about how AI has been around for a long time in some capacity, but now it's a really hot button. And again, if you follow Singularity, Ray Kurzweil, some great stuff. He published in Time magazine. There's a great article on this. If you look up Kurzweil, Singularity, Time magazine, article talked around 2035-ish. I'm trying to remember because off the top of my head is when the day of singularity, which is the day that AI would basically be able to think for itself.
It's sooner now. It's like 29.
Yeah, we're ahead of schedule.
It's 28, right? 29. Musk thinks it's a year earlier, but it's 28, 29.
Yeah, we're ahead of schedule, and this happened in basically stuff he was predicting in the 1960s, which is an incredible foresight. So AI's been around; it's exponentially increasing. If you go back 18 months ago, we weren't talking about the bandwidth and need for processing speed for AI as at the level we are now. We were talking about the demand of energy that was being needed for crypto mining, and the level of the pressure that was putting on the grid. The electric grid, and of course the demand for resources to be able to keep up with it. That hasn't gone away, just the conversation. When we talk about it, again, things going full circle, let's talk about the confirmation biases. Let's talk about the vacuum chamber. Let's talk about the news. What is news, or what does the media want to push? The things that capture your eyes, right? So just because you're not hearing about it right now doesn't mean it isn't existing and it's gone away. It just means that it's not hot enough that to be the topic of conversation. So now we have the demand for energy for AI, which is, again, exponential. The investment has been massive over the last 18 months. You still got crypto mining still out there, right? So this need for energy goes back to what we've been talking about for several years now: cheap energy. The only way to be able to advance cultures, to advance GDP, to advance standard of living anywhere. And we've talked about prime ministers of Africa talking about this. I don't care about your morals. I care, and I care about being able to get enough energy to be able to help our economy and our people thrive. We've got to be able to have it. And it's there. I know that we're having advances now in hydrogen fuel cell technology. Finally, this has been, this is something they thought was going to be the future. And it took a long time, and it really kind of fell from the grace and conversations. It has come back because they're finally able to make it. And if we can create that is a fantastic reusable energy, because let's face it, our atmosphere has an abundance of water, an abundance of hydrogen, an abundance of oxygen. And if you could take those two things, fuse them into water, and then split them apart and turn them into hydrogen and oxygen, and then burn them and create water again, that is the ultimate renewable resource. But it's not cheap to be able to build that technology efficiently. Now you go back into where we, storage, battery storage. Lithium-ion batteries are the thing right now, but they're constantly looking for ways to improve on that, because lithium is incredibly environmentally damaging to mine for, and lithium is incredibly flammable as well as toxic. Okay, so the professor, I forget his name, but he was the professor, I believe, at the University of Texas that came up with lithium battery technology. He recently passed away. When he retired from the research team that came up with this battery storage, he said basically the next great battery technology, in his opinion, was going to be sodium ion. What did he like about sodium ion? A number of things. First of all, you can charge it up in minutes instead of hours. Number two, it's not flammable, and it can be it's easy and abundant. Sodium's everywhere, and it can be recyclable. Guess what, though? He's like, I'm not going to be able to do this. I'm retiring. Leave it for someone else. I'm hearing and reading that sodium, they use sodium ion actually in outer space. NASA's been using it forever because of it easy. I mean, sodium is what we use in our bodies to do the electrical impulse. Sodium, potassium are the number one elements for electrical impulse. I mean, when we talk about water that has electrolytes, guess what? I know it's a fancy word and ooh, it sells and hey, electrolyte, and you spend a lot of extra money for this. Electrolytes are just sodium, magnesium, potassium. You get that from food. You don't need it in water. Eat a banana with it. The point is, that's all it is. It's fancy snake oil to say, hey, you got to go out and pay extra for this. It's there. And NASA's been using sodium ion as in their little micro propellants that they use to move satellites and Voyager and all of these other space technology for decades, but on a massive scale. Can we create that as a next wave of storage? Because the thing about energy is it's two things, and this was the issue with whether or not we did wind energy, solar energy, nuclear energy. How do you store the energy when you're not using it? And how do you create energy that's going to be more efficient and therefore create more power and less heat? Because heat is lost. That's why LEDs, whether you like them or not, expensive. Are they supposed to last forever? I don't know. Mine seem to burn out as fast as incandescent. But the reason that LEDs were so successful is for the light sources, they don't the highest energy output of photons versus heat. Okay, because the old incandescents, they got hot, they burn your hands. So how do we create energy? How do we store it? That was something Xcel Energy was working on. It's like you can have wind power, but wind's stronger at night than during the day. Solar power, well, it's only good during the day, not night. So how do you capture that and then actually store it to be used later? That is a major issue. So in summary, the energy, cheap energy, the storing of energy, these are things that are going to continue to be areas of extreme need as we are continuing to push our resources to the limits on how we consume energy, because it's only going up, and technology has exacerbated that to an extreme degree. And so, I think that, it's good to see that technology is pushing, is used their lobbying power for something that might actually be for a greater good, because we know, and we've seen this, that historically what they've lobbied for has been and anybody that lobbies is doing this for self-interest. But in this case, if it allows us to be able to move the needle on how we can hopefully create clean energy, you and I have said this before, nobody wants a dirty planet, right? How can we create this clean energy in a way? Because we're going to have an increasing need for that. And if, again, we go back to AI and what's going to happen over the next 10 to 15 years, which was the original guess, and you push that now to 2028, 2029, in which that day of singularity comes alive, at that point, the technology itself may create, if it does come alive in its own ability to think freely, it's going to think freely about the energy it needs to survive. And that means the technology itself will expect the demands of energy. And it'll be interesting to see how that comes along too. I'm totally off the rails here, but I think that this is, there's so many different variables that go into the same conversation of energy. I did want to say something though. You mentioned California and the energy and the brownouts. A very interesting chart as a total segue here, just to kind of go in another direction. I posted this here. It's what is a chart that I found on capital gains, capital losses of states. If we look at the cumulative gain loss of adjusted gross income between 2019 and 2022, I don't think it's going to be a surprise to anybody. And this comes from the Internal Revenue Service. So they might know a thing or two about income. But I don't think this could be a surprise to anybody, that especially with regards to mobility, COVID was a singular event that potentially changed forever where people need to be and where they need to live with regards to work. But also, I think it changed forever where people were willing to move to with regards to their political beliefs. I mean, if I said, what state do you think people have mostly moved to that are conservative? A lot of people would raise their hands and say Florida, maybe Texas, right? If you say where do people move to if they want freedom of bodily expression, like abortion, people would say California, New York, my state, Minnesota, who has come out and said we're going to be the last state where women can go to and make those decisions. Again, I'm not trying to tick people off. Each state's made their own decisions. Well, guess what? They'd actually IRS data has shown that very interestingly enough, because it is extremely expensive to run these states. And if a company loses revenues or customers, it has to make adjustments. It's going to either have to drop prices, or it's going to have to improve service to create a reason that people are going to want to increase revenue or buy for their goods, increasing revenue, or else it goes into bankruptcy and companies come and go. There's books out there that show how many companies were around 100 years ago. What was the S&P 500 made of? It's not made anywhere close to what the S&P 500 is today. Most of those companies are gone. Woolworths at one point was an everyday name brand. Sears was an everyday name brand. They are no more. Rubbermaid at one point was a flash in the pan, was one of the most valuable company in the world. It's gone. Okay. So companies come and go. Bed Bath & Beyond was one of the biggest retailers in America for decades. It's gone. It's obsolete. So basic tenet is that how does this affect the states? We talk about money. We talk about the creation of money. People talk about the federal government making money. Yeah, they can do that. States can't. So I thought this was an interesting chart. It is showing, and again, I don't know what the outcome is going to be, but I thought this was very interesting that there has been, and this does tell you something about, corporations. They like money, right? They like to make money. Well, California, New York, Illinois, and New Jersey. California since 2019 to 2022 has seen almost $75 billion loss in adjusted gross income. New York, somewhere around 60 to 70 billion. Illinois, about 40 billion. New Jersey, if you look at this, maybe 20 to 30 billion loss. Florida has been the biggest recipient of that. Over 100 to 125 billion dollar increase in income between 2019 and 2022. Texas, somewhere around 30 billion. South Carolina and Tennessee, somewhere around 25. So there is definitely a movement of income generators to these other states. Again, I just thought this was really interesting because you brought up California and the brownouts, but there's also, that made me think of what's going on there, because that is a loss of income taxes in those states. And again, how are those states going to adjust? Time will tell.
Yeah, no, it's a good perspective, Doug. We're going to wrap it up here, but yeah, I mean, look, there's been a mass migration in a lot of these states for years since COVID, and COVID really accentuated it. And I think it's good. Some parts I don't like about it, but I think overall it's good. We live in a country. Originally, it was a republic. Most people don't understand what that means, but the reason that we have 50 states, the original reason has certainly changed. They did that originally, but the premise behind it's really sound. Because if you don't like your state, just move to another state. You don't have to move to another country. And everyone talks about, well, if this person gets elected, I'm leaving. I'm going to another country. Every time we have an election, people spout that. Like, great, you should go. Don't just talk about it. So last time when Trump was president, Biden was running, they're like, if Biden doesn't win, I'm leaving. Good, go away. Go somewhere else, right? And this time you're getting the same thing. If Biden gets elected again, I'm leaving. Like, go. Like, don't just talk about it. Just leave, right? But the thing is, in this country is you have the ability to move. You can move different states, right? In Europe, they've got a little different, experiment going on over there. But like here, it's like if you don't like California, you're moving to Texas. A ton of people have done that. Or they're moving to Nevada. So it's close enough, but they don't have the ridiculous taxes that California have. So the thing I don't like, the downside of this is the people who voted for these idiots to destroy California are the ones that are moving out. Like, you should be forced to have them change their policies. Don't just leave a mess. I mean, a lot of California is a mess. So, it's there's two sides of it, but I do like the fact that you can move, because these states, as Doug mentioned, are going to get increasingly, handsy with your money, because they're going to come out and say, well, sorry, our budget isn't lining up. We need to tax you more. Well, maybe you should just line up your budget instead of getting handsy with my money, right? I mean, some of these states, it's almost double digits for the state taxes. Like, really? Like, is it that high? You guys are that bad shape? Maybe you should cut services. Maybe you shouldn't waste so much money on stupid programs like, research on hamster humping. Or I've seen some of these programs. It's ridiculous, and it's like, really, you spend a few $1,000,000 on that, but you're not on homeless or paying your police officers or firemen. Like, come on, like, grow up. So I think if you're looking at which state you're going to live in, I think this trend is only going to grow because Texas has gone from just kind of an oil and gas state to a lot of tech people are moving there. Great climate, great weather, and they're creating their own little Silicon Valley of Texas, so to speak. So a lot of people move there. California's a different place, right? You don't have that big tech money. The state's going to be disrupted because they're not going to get those tax dollars. It's going to be a different place. So it's good and bad. Obviously, there's always two sides of it, but I do like the fact that this can be flexible, right? Like some of the policies, like Roe v. Wade, a lot of people don't like it. Some people did, but it had nothing to do with abortion. It had to do with moving it back to states' rights. Now, you might not agree. Like, that's not what we're talking about. If you're mad because I just said it's states' rights, you're in a different conversation than I'm having. You need to have an adult conversation, which is the thing that changed wasn't that you can or can't have abortions. It was the states get to decide. That was the issue. It had nothing. I mean, it had to do with abortion, but it was basically the states get to decide. Like it or hate it, that's what happened. So you have the ability to be mobile, and now if you don't like it, you can move to a state that advertises your political desires or however you want to see the world. And that's great. That's one of the great things about our country. I don't agree with everybody's choice in this country, but I like the fact that we have choice. As long as we have choice, as long as we have property rights, this will continue to be a great country. When that starts to go away, we're a different place, and it's not so great. So anyway, Doug, let's wrap it up here. It's at the hour. We gotta head out.
Yeah, well, appreciate it. And again, just kind of closing on that. I mean, yeah, the costs are not going down in any of those states. So yeah, something's got to give. One of the things not also going down in cost is cost of college. And if you've been listening to this, you know that one of the things I focus on is how do people overcome the risks that they have in their retirement? And those risks include mortality, inflation, taxes. It includes things like longevity and outliving your assets. But one of those is liquidity events. Now, some of those are unforeseen, like health, but some of those are foreseen, like paying for college or car or new property. And there's actually a chart I pulled up here. I don't think we'll have time to show it, but it's basically the fate of 2009 era student debt. Okay. Right now, they're actually showing the percent of original loan amount remaining for men from 2009 is down to about 70% of that original loan value. For women, the statistic was showing that it's just under 100%. Okay. We talk about, income differences and what it takes in this country. And a lot of that has to do with the job choices, people make. Like social work doesn't pay near as much as other careers, but it still takes a major or a master's to get. And so the selection of college is critical. Okay. And you can see from these statistics what that means in terms of how much money people have to take out for college or have to come up with for college, or how that's going to mean in terms of how they're going to pay that off and what kind of burden that's going to have to families, either fleecing retirement or having loans that are going to be on the books that they're going to have to deal with for possibly the rest of their lives. Okay. And this has become an issue where there are billions of dollars of student loans out there. Families are taking hundreds of thousands of dollars and putting it to college and then finding out they don't have enough for retirement. This doesn't have to be you. If with proper planning, you can prepare for the liquidity needs and prepare to minimize the risks that you can have on your retirement so that you can have an extraordinary future as well as your child. If you want to learn more about this, go check out mergentcollegeadvisors.com for some information. That's our site. That is spelled MERGENT, mergentcollegeadvisors.com to learn more information now, because this college problem is a retirement problem at its very core.
Thanks, Doug. Appreciate you sharing. I'm going to share one chart, and we're gonna wrap it up here. Actually, I saw this. This thing was yesterday. The markets were bad yesterday, and of course, you can see the red is bad and green is good. It circled pretty much all of tech. So tech did poorly. Everything else seemed to do fine. And I point this out not because tech bad, everything else good, but because this is a sign of what we call rotation. Rotation is a really positive thing in the markets, and it shows strength in the bull market. When you have rotations, that's a good sign. If this whole screen was red, that's a bad sign. Because tech has so much control over the performance of the index, when that goes down, everything else suffers. But other stocks obviously did well. So just understand the rotational factor is an important aspect of investing, and not saying you should rotate in and out of stocks, but when you see this, it's actually a good sign that we're still in a bull market. So as we're kind of wrapping it up here, we're gonna take it home. So that's the show for this week. Thank you again for joining us in Money Tree Investing Podcast. My name is Kirk Chisholm, wealth manager of Innovative Advisory Group. We don't just manage your wealth; we make your life better. You can find more about me at innovativewealth.com, and of course, you can find me every week here on the show. Please subscribe to the podcast and the podcast app of your choosing. You can also check out the show at moneytreepodcast.com. On the website, you'll have access to the show notes, resources, and the archive shows. Also, we're now on YouTube. Please check out our YouTube channel. When you're there, please subscribe and leave a comment. Lastly, please leave a show rating and comment on the podcast app of your choice. Oh, and don't forget, do your own research. This show is for informational use only. We're not telling you what to think, merely how to think about investing. We're also not selling any products or services, so do not consider this advice. If you have any problems with the show, I blame Putin. Please send me an email, express your feelings. If you're seeking financial advice, talk to an oracle or a fortune teller, or maybe just a licensed financial advisor. I'm one, but as I said earlier, I'm not selling anything, but I'm easy to find. Have a great week ahead, and remember, no one will care about your money